wait, no, it's still going. So just to reiterate, this is being recorded. If you still have your camera and or microphone on, you are consenting to your image and or voice being recorded and posted to the Kingdom YouTube channel. Additionally, as this is an official event, I will be briefly sharing my screen. Reminder of the SCA harassment and bullying policy. The SCA prohibits harassment and bullying of all individuals and groups. Participants engaging in this behavior are subject to appropriate sanctions. If you are subjected to harassment, bullying, or retaliation, or if you become aware of anyone being harassed or bullied, contact a seneschal, the president of the SCA, or your Kingdom Board's ombudsman. And with that, we are all set on the MOAS side. Thank you again so much, Fortune. I'm so excited to take this class.
Thank you, Elena. You are fantastic as always. So this is, so those of you who do not know me, I am Fortune St. Keyne. I am a Countess. I am from the beautiful Shire of Quintavia, which is the Worcester County, roughly, Massachusetts, which I will tell you is the best shire in the East. Not that I'm judging. I am not in garb. Really, none of us really are. I am usually portraying a around 1520s, 1530s Venetian courtesan persona. I am very heavily involved with the known world courtesans, and I am very heavily involved with the East Kingdom courtesans, which is known as the Velvet Mask, which is actually named after a period fashion accessory that would have been used by noble ladies going out and about. So the sable domino. And I forgot to turn off the sound on my phone, which is going to become a problem. So with that, getting interested in the courtesan persona, I got interested in really what were your options as a single woman in Venice in the very late end of period. So we're talking about the 1500s and slightly into the early 1600s, where we have some data. There's a bibliography in my handout. My handout is linked here. It is on my blog. Please go and read it. There are some fantastic books in there. There are some books that I will tell you I have some sort of, I can see their bias. So one of our fun things as academics or amateur academics is you sort of get to see the bias sometimes that it forms in things. So there are some books that are very much like women have been oppressed forever. And there are some books that are very much, well, why wouldn't you want to stay at home and only have boy babies? Why isn't that your goal? That should be everyone's goal. What more could you want? I could want more. So when I sort of started in the SCA, which was about 13 years ago, and in the East, I've only ever lived in the East, there weren't that many courtesan personas. There really wasn't anyone talking about courtesan personas, but there was a movie, which I call the Venetian courtesan, the Venetian Renaissance gateway drug, which is Dangerous Beauty, which you have not seen Dangerous Beauty. It's an absolutely fantastic movie. I love it very dearly. I actually made us have movie night at Penzek and watch it last year. Ozzer consented to having to sit through that as long as we could watch the Disney Robin Hood, animated Robin Hood. So I started out knowing that I, personality-wise, am not suited for the life of a meek and submissive noble wife. So what were my options? What were my options as a persona? And then doing that research, I wanted to bring that research to other people. So a lot of us in the SCA tend to portray more nobility than contains here. More nobility than lower classes, but we're going to talk about both options. One of those weird converse things is the more money you had as a woman, the more restrictions actually were placed on you. These dowries were no joke. In the Venetian Renaissance, in the Italian Renaissance in general, These dowries were incredible amounts of money. And in Italy, that wasn't just your money. That wasn't your father's money. That was your entire family's money. Your job as a young woman was either to marry in and strengthen the financial security of the household, of the family, or if you were a noble daughter, you were sort of, there wasn't enough dowry for you, you were expendable, and you were going to end up in a convent. And 60% of noble women ended up in convents. If I do this class in person, I make people count off by threes, and I tell them that the ones are the ones that get married, and 2 and 3 are the ones who end up in convents. It is incredibly high amount of women with basically nothing to do but pray. So these convents, and Venice gets yelled at about them, end up a little lax in their habits, in their and habits, outfits, but also their practices and how cloistered they actually were. So one of the things when we are dealing with the Venetian wealth system is, again, it's not just your money, it's your entire family's money. And the first time, the daughter with a dowry is your social asset. So nearly 60% of women are going to end up in convents in the nobility. Only a minority really joined willingly. Only a minority were like, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to be a bride of Christ. The rest were sort of like, well, you're sort of a burden on the family. So unless you want to be up to your brother's wife's, sort of up to her whims or your other family's whims, you really need to go away. The Venier family produced 52 nuns and only 29 brides in the period between 1590 and 1670. So that's a lot of nuns. There were a lot of convents that pop up. And single women were considered dangerous. So you really had no status if you were of marriageable age and you were not attached to a gentleman. So even our courtesans are going to have husbands. They may be widowed, or it may be someone that you have married for the name and you have pensioned off to live somewhere else and live his own life. But to really have status, you needed to have been married. And you can actually see this throughout history with different royal mistresses and high-ranking courtesans. There's always some mysterious husband who may have existed, who may still exist. What is it? Victoria's son, Albert, Edward, what is he? Edward II? Made or arranged a marriage for a woman that he wanted to sleep with to a servant in his household, so that he was able to have a mistress relationship with her and it would not be as unseemly. And one of my favorite Renaissance painters is, and I'm just going to butcher names today, so please bear with me, Sofonisba Anguissola, who was a court painter actually in the Spanish court. She is Italian in origin. She ended up as a court painter in the Spanish court. She has several very famous portraits. If you look up her name, you will see. But she also painted her sister, Elena, as a nun. She also has a portrait of her mother, Bianca, that I'm very familiar with, but a whole bunch of different portraits. But in a guide for the patriarch in 1590, it is quoted as saying, "Women are very wicked, generally behaving badly and displaying excessive pride, but these defects are just part of their nature and do not constitute a sufficient reason not to marry." So women are going to be, in period, seen as the ones who are unable to help themselves around sex. They're going to be seen as the silly ones, the vain, when really those are traits we can spread between all genders, I think. Three ladies in Venice wrote treatises that you're able to read to this day about their options and how much they sucked. There was a noble matron, Modesta di Pozzi di Forzi, who wrote under the name of Moderata Forte. She wrote The Worth of Women, wherein clearly revealed their nobility and their superiority to men. So clearly we know what her thesis is on this. We also have Lucrezia Martinella, who was the daughter of a prominent physician, wife of a doctor, wife and mother. So we have Moderata, who was from the highest classes. We have Lucrezia, who is middle class, wrote The Nobility and Excellence of Women and the Defects and Vices of Men. And then we have my favorite, which is Arcangelo Turbody, who is the rebel nun. She keeps getting yelled at throughout her time in the convent by cardinals, by bishops, by the ruling classes to moderate her ways, and she refuses each and every time. Arcangelo is an amazing human. She wrote such texts as Paternal Tyranny, and corresponded with cultural and political figures all her adult life. She is keeping up a rapid correspondence. She is meeting with people. She is holding salons, and she is still in the convent. Her writings center on the issues of forced enclosure. So she was put into the convent at a very young age and really given no choice as to whether or not she wanted to take her vows. She saw this as symptoms of the systems of patriarchy and misogyny, which she's not wrong. And one of the period male writers even advocates for the superiority of women, because in the law, women can marry without parental consent at 16, but men could not marry until 18. So clearly women are going to mature early and are going to be much more superior if they can marry younger. We know that's not really true. The preferred path of happiness is that you are going to get married. Now, whether or not you get married has very little to do with you falling in love and you meeting someone who is your perfect other half. It is much more to do with, does your father have money to marry you off? And do you have other siblings in line before you where that money is going to be spent? You could not marry below you. It was extremely uncouth for you to marry below you. Venetian society is extremely striated. They have a book of all of who the citizens are, written in gold. And you need to marry well. Dante writes in his Paradiso, disparagingly about dowries. He is echoing a lot of, I think, the ideas of the time, stating in his great-great-grandfather's time, they did not see fathers taking fright at the birth of a daughter, and that dowries had fled all limitations. So in Venice in the mid-1300s, dowries were about 650 to 1,540 ducats. And in 1420, the Senate tries to limit how much you can put in as a dowry of 1,600. It got revised again in the early 1500s to about 3,000. And I did the math, of course, now 4 years ago, which equated that to roughly $450,000 is your dowry. And that is the cash portion of your dowry. It's a huge amount of money. Beyond that, you're also going to be going out with worldly goods. But this is all you're going to get from your father's estate. This is all of your inheritance. When your parents pass away at a later date, you aren't getting anything else. This is all of your inheritance at one time, and it's to be in the hand of the person you are going to marry. So Leonardo da Vinci, who was court painter for the King of France, was earning 400 ducats a year. So this is a stupidly large amount of money. Your parents probably did not have this money themselves. It is going to be collected from the rest of the family members. And more than that, we know of court cases where family members are suing each other because, well, when your daughter got married, I sent over a gold necklace, or when your child got married, I sent over gold bracelets, and then when my child got married, you only sent silver, or you didn't send the same, or I sent rings and something else. So it is coming from everyone else in the family, and so a lot of your bridal jewelry, a lot of that are going to be repurposed and sent back out throughout the family. So enjoy it while you can. You don't get to have that stuff very long. All right. But part of also this being your entire inheritance from your father's family means that there were a lot of lawsuits also for women suing for their dowries back. That their husband was not taking care of that money, was not holding it in trust as they should have. And there are women suing and winning to get their dowries back and to dissolve their marriages and get separation, legal separation from their spouse. Let's see if that's any better. All right. So more women than men filed for petition of separation in the 16th and 17th century in Venice, and a lot of them were granted. Right? So if you go into a book called The Marriage Wars, there's one on Caterina and Francesco, their dowry and separation suit. She sues him to get his money back. Leone Morosini in 1342 got a dowry of 576 ducats and 346 ducats worth of trousseau, furniture, and household items. That's called a corridum. And in this person's will, in Morosini's will, his wife was pregnant at the time, and it was instructed when he had written this that in case there was a second daughter, she should be placed in a convent with an annuity of 10 ducats. So first daughter, almost 1,000 ducats worth of stuff, money, and trousseau. Second daughter, 10 a year. And she should be put in a convent. There is only money for one of these girls to get married, maybe two, if you're an extremely wealthy family, extremely powerful family. After that, if there are any other little girls born, you are going to end up in a convent. So your ideal, and we are in the Renaissance, so they are starting to hearken back to the ancient world and the ancient philosophers for their reasoning. So they supposedly, going back to Aristotle, a bride should be about 18 and a groom should be 37. It's quite the age difference. So yes, you're young. You're not as young as people think of marriages in the Middle Ages, but you are pretty young, 18, and you're supposed to marry someone who is almost 40. All right. So catching a spouse was a particular topic. There is a fantastic book called How to Do It, which I link in the bibliography, which is the author has gone through all these different ephemeral pamphlets that were sold out in the streets, and he has combined them all into one book. And so there's a lot of different advice. And a lot of them talk about how to get married. And then a lot of them, after they talk about how to get married, talk about how you have a boy. Because your main goal is to have a little boy. Male children. Those are the goal. Catching a spouse is, again, a very popular topic. One treatise on marriage starts with supposed advice from Socrates. Socrates did not like women, did not like the married state. He says, if you do not marry, You will miss the sweet delights of having children, along with the loving companionship and support of a wife. And if you do marry, you are headed to a life of constant warfare. Without peace or truce, it will leave you no moment of repose and will turn your nights into harsh, cruel battlefields. Instead of finding a quiet bed, you will lie in an armed camp with an unceasing din of complaints and laments all about. I cannot imagine what his marriage was like. The extra boys are going to go into the military. Some of them are going to go into the family business. The extra young men are going to go into the military usually. They are also going to go into the priesthood, which is a good and noble and lucrative career, especially if you're in Italy, going into Catholic Church. But the boys tended to have a lot more freedom to go out and about and sort of have more autonomy. The girls were really going to be either a wife and a mother and going to be in your husband's home, or you were going to be a nun. They may stay single. They may marry someone in the middle class. It was less taboo for a second or third son to marry down than it was for a girl. It was extremely taboo for them to marry down. All right. So, advice for choosing a young bride. If you choose one who is young, you will have to train her to curb her accursed tongue. She will do nothing but mutter with her constant complaining, her voice to the sky ringing. She won't give a hoot if you threaten to give her the boot. So again, all these different little things of advice are very flattering to the young bride. Let me just tell you that right now. So they will tell you to avoid a young bride. They will tell you to avoid a rich bride. They will tell you to avoid a poor bride. They will tell you to avoid a pretty, an amorous, and especially a foreigner. I think while we're all in the time of quarantine, I'm sure someone's seen quarantine comes from Venice and how long the merchant ships would have to stay out in the harbor. They have an island still that's there where they would quarantine you until they let you in. Venice is extremely phobic of foreigners. They are the first person to be blamed. If anything goes wrong in the city, it is because of the immigrant population. So marrying outside of the community, outside of Venice, is taboo. Also, there are a bunch of wedding portraits. There are some of my favorite to go find. If you're going through art museums and things, the way you can tell a bride is often there's a gold chain. And I'll talk more about this later. If you have the handout, I have Lorenzo Lotto's. He has a marriage portrait from the Prado. So other advice around 1300 for brides sounds extremely similar to if you were to read a book that's written for a young woman about to be married in the 20s, 30s, or even 50s. The advice stays the same down through the ages, and it's awful, just about all of them. So avoid anything that might annoy him. Do not be joyful when he is sad. Do not be sad when he is joyful. It just reminds me of the Singer Sewing Machine book, where it's like, you have to be in the perfect mindset to sew. Make sure all your chores are done. Make sure your husband's dinner is done. Like, dress up, look pretty, put lipstick on. Find out the other advice for brides around 1300, find out what he likes to eat. If you don't like those things, don't tell him. Don't show it. If your tastes are not aligned with his, don't let him know. Your wants are not important. If he is asleep, sick, or tired, do not disturb him. And if you must, be gentle, which I think really is advice for any spouse or anyone who's in a relationship. or anyone. I know at Penzic they would send Anton in to my tent with coffee, and he'd just like, okay, it's time to get up. Please don't kill me. Please get up now. Do not rob him, lend his goods, or give them away. So if the neighbor comes to borrow your lawnmower, whose name might be Giuseppe, do not let him borrow your servants. Do not lend anything out. Also, your brand's just not equipped for business dealings. So just best wait for your husband to come home and know about that. Do not be too curious about his business, but if he does confide in you, keep his secrets. Be good to his family and friends, which I think should be advice for anyone who's in any relationship. Do not do anything important without at first seeking his advice. Don't make any big purchases without talking to your spouse. Do not ask him to do things that are impossible or might damage his honor or position. I do not know what they're thinking of in this, but I think it's hilarious. Do not ask him to do the impossible. Be attractive, fresh, clean, modest in appearance, and chaste in behavior. Do not be too familiar with the servants. And that's real difficult because your palazzo is not big. Even the largest of them had a lot of people in those spaces, and within the spaces of the home were only certain places where a woman could go. Now, granted, they have done studies of wills, and when they have taken inventory of the house, they have found things in rooms where they shouldn't have been. So, a woman should never have been in her husband's office, but her hair combs are in there as well as a sewing bag. So clearly she was in there. But you're working in very close contact with your servants. So I think that's really interesting advice, keeping that delineation between the classes. Do not go out too often. The man's domain is outside where the woman's is in the home. If you're a noblewoman in Venice, when you are going out is when you are going to church. Full stop. It's very rare you're going out other than that. You're really going to be in the home, and you're not going to be walking the streets. You're not doing the shopping. That's what your servants are doing. You are going to go to church, and that's just about it. Do not speak too much, for silence is a sign of modesty and chastity. And do not make your husband jealous. You tell me what to do. Another one of those. And especially, you were to be a virgin. There was basically no other choice. You were to be a virgin, and if they had raised you well, you would not be interested in sex. Yona, Arliana, you were living in the house usually with your, you might be living with female relatives if they were not in a convent, but other than that, no, you really don't go visiting. You stay in the house. Pale white complexion is very, very much desirable. You do not want to be seen as being out in the sun very often, but also it is thought that you really do not have any real, you have no business being outside of the home. Just like it says there, your world is inside, his is outside. You're not really doing the visiting like we would think of. You're really inside. You will see other people at church. That's about it. Young women, again, are expected to be virgins. That's extremely important. And as such, there are lots of different pamphlets and folk knowledge on how to check if she is a virgin. And some of them are real dumb. Lorenzo Giobidi disputes commonly held beliefs that a woman's nipples darken Apparently that is one of the ways you can tell that someone is not a virgin. Dark nipples. Her neck will become larger. And the tip of her nose will lengthen if she has intercourse. So you want short-nosed, thin-necked women with pale nipples. But basically in his pamphlet, he writes about how that's all nonsense, that really you can't tell that way that someone is a virgin. He also cautions against some of the tests that are known at the time for virgins, such as grinding up aloe and feeding it to your prospective bride, or you're going to put dock leaves on the fire and make her inhale the smoke, which I don't know how you're supposed to do stealthily. Like, just come over here to the fire and just breathe this. It was thought that a virgin would immediately become incontinent once fed aloe or inhaling the dock leaf smoke. Lorenzo, in his pamphlet, suggests that it's very easy to fake that reaction, especially because it's pretty obvious what you're up to. He suggests the less scientific approach of studying the sweetness of countenance and general demeanor of your intended to see whether or not she is a virgin. Venetians had the belief that if the noble young woman had been raised correctly, she would have absolutely no interest in sex. Absolutely none. It is very much it's very much a divided society where if a woman is to have interest in intercourse, she is loose, she has no morals, she is likely a courtesan. So you're supposed to be terrified of your wedding night. Congratulations. So the way to look like a bride, or look like what someone is seeking for a bride, they have listed out the ideals. They're done in threes. So 3 things that should be white: your flesh, your teeth, and your face. So again, pale skin, pale teeth. 3 things should be black: your eyes, your lashes, and your pubic hair, which will get real fun when we get to the next in a few. So eyes should be black. They want dark eyes. 3 things should be red: your lips, your cheeks, and your nails. And remember that pink's not really a concept. So when they mean red in your nails, that means your nail beds should be pink and healthy. That's one of those signs of illness that they will point to. So if your nail beds become pale or turn a different color, you're unwell. That's one of the things they're going to check for. 3 things should be long. So your body, your hair should be long, and your hands should be long. So if you look at some of those 1400s portraits, especially look at someone like Carlo Crivelli, the hands are extremely long. The Mannerist portraits get very long hands, very long feet, which is interesting. 3 things should be short. Your teeth should be short. Don't know how you're going to fix that. Well, I do know how, and it's painful. Your ears and your feet should be short. Your chest, hips, and forehead should be wide. So they're not, they're looking for that hourglass shape. You look at Titian, or you look at Tintorello, or you look at Veronese, you'll see very much the shape they are looking for. And those women are not very large busted, but they have broader chests. Things that should be narrow: your mouth. Again, you shouldn't be talking. We already went over this. You shouldn't talk. Your mouth should be narrow. Your waist should be narrow, as should your vagina. So those old wives' tales of, you should be tight, very much go back into the day. 3 things should be large: your thighs, I often refer to as those sort of 40s pinup thighs. They've got, those girls got gams. You got big thighs. Buttocks and your nature should be large. Not exactly sure what they mean by that. We're going to assume they mean that you should be generous. And 3 things should be soft. Your hair, your lips, and your fingers. Your fingers especially, because fingers with calluses mean that you have done work. And that is not what your noble husband is looking for. He is looking for someone who has never done any hard manual work in their lives. And your mouth, your nose, and your breasts, again, should be small. Right? And that is from Florence in about 1600, that whole list. The reason the pubic hair being black is weird is because they really liked blondes. They loved blondes. You would sit out, one of the things you could do is you could sit out on the balcony of your palazzo and you could dye your hair. Bleach it out. There are recipes for bleaching your hair involving the dregs of white wine, and some of them involve pee. But blonder is the better. I don't understand. I think they don't understand how basic anatomy is going to work, or basic genetics are going to work, because they want you to have dark eyes but real blonde hair. You can see mine is getting less blonde as quarantine goes on. So you're going to sit on your altana, you're going to sit on your balcony, and you're going to try out some blonding recipes, which may or may not ruin your hair. I haven't done this yet. I keep thinking at some time I'm going to do this. But then I keep thinking, I don't want to sit with this on my hair. So 1562, the ornament of the lady has a recipe for bleaching your hair using the dregs of white wine chopped into olive oil, and you comb that into your hair while you're sitting out in the sun. So please enjoy your time of relaxation with your white wine dregs in your hair. I don't mind sitting out in the sun with a white wine, not putting it in my hair. And then there's another that says to take 5 glasses of fountain water. And if you've been to Italy as a tourist, you will know that the fountains are usually, unless at least I did this in Rome. I don't remember doing this in Florence, but the fountains come from the mountains. The water for those come from the mountains. They're pure water. So you can actually still drink from the fountains in Rome, where you would not want to drink from the tap in your hotel, or you would not want to have the water. Otherwise, you would want to have it bottled. But they specifically mention here fountain water because they want pure water. Add something. Olive watches. Not sure. 1 ounce. Add soap, 3 ounces. Barley straw, 1 handful. Boil that in an earthen pot till 2/3 be boiled away. Let it settle. Strain the water with the ashes, adding to every glass of water pure honey, 1 ounce, and set it up for your use. So that is another recipe for blonding. I don't think that's going to work. Yes. And then they also, some of the bride advice will tell you, despite them wanting you to be blonde, they're also going to advise in Verona, 1592, Cosmo Agnelli, who has a lovely pamphlet called The Loving Advice on the Abuses of Vain Women. No colored hair. Dyeing or bleaching your hair blonde is a reprehensible practice that does violence to nature and offends the supreme author who gave you the color which you have. I'm only trying to fit in with your unrealistic cultural expectations of beauty. Don't yell at me for it. No powdered faces or exposed breasts, which is hilarious because they're all out there, especially in Venice. Oh my God, the tourists were scandalized. If a woman first adorns her bosom and then displays herself, she is advertising merchandise for sale, is what he's saying. And no high-heeled shoes. They prevent you from kneeling properly in church and doing your chores in the home like a good wife and mother. Remember that high heel shoes are going to be originally for men to show their fantastic calves. But especially in Venice, you're going to have the chopines, which are very high shoes. Very high shoes. You sort of teeter around and you balance on a servant, maybe two servants if you're very lucky. This is why I'm very glad that Simona had twins, because I assumed that that was for my use. Later, when I'm able to do like the 12-inch chopines and just balance on Howard and Iris. It's my theory. We'll see if they're up for that. But they're going to tell you that that is a sin. Now, it is a necessity when you live in a city that floods like Venice does. So we're going to talk about how, as a noble young woman, you are going to be garbed out there. So there are going to be clues in how their parents are dressing out you as to what your marriageable status is. Because again, you're leaving the house to go to church. It's really the only time you're going to see people. So a young and adolescent girl would wear a white veil to church that covers the face and the chest. Once you reach marriageable age, you get a shorter black veil, usually silk. It is very firmly fixed in place, so no one can see your face. But let me tell you what they can see. Everything right here. You get much lower cut dresses. Tits are out for business. Just tell you. All right. Can't see you. You see him across a crowded church. He is not going to see you. Your face is going to be obscured, and they're going to be very, very sure that you cannot, that they cannot see your face. Marriages are brokered. They are not something where you're just going to like meet him at a dance or a carnival and we fall in love. No, no. You're going to meet him usually right before you get married, if you're lucky. Vecellio, who Cesare Vecellio wrote this fantastic book called The Habits of the World. He was commissioned to write about clothing. That was his art. So he had engravings of different outfits from different areas. He corresponded a great deal with other people in Italy and Europe to get an idea of what they wore. He put together this massive book. The further things get from him, the little crazier stuff starts to look. So he has outfits in there of the King and Queen of Florida, who are wearing the most delightful feather headdresses and leaf ensemble that has no basis in reality whatsoever. But it's in the book. But he talks about, he has this running commentary throughout the entire book, and he has just this sort of pithy wit to him, but he will talk about how just it's so unseemly. They let them date now. They go out on chaperoned outings before they're married. I mean, really. In our day, you didn't even know the person you were marrying. Like, he has this whole thing where it's like, well, you're not supposed to wear black, but of course everyone's veils are black. Or you're not supposed to do this, but of course everyone does. So if you can find, there's a very thick book. I have it back here somewhere. I think it's hidden in my bookcase. Find it with the translation that came out, I want to say around 2010, 2012. It's worth the read. So marriages are going to be arranged by a broker. Generally, the bride is not seen by the groom and his family until those contracts are signed. Because again, this is a business transaction. This has nothing to do with your feelings. You could just keep your feelings out of this. They really also just don't have the expectation of romantic love that we do. A lot of cultures around the world do not have the expectation of romantic love the way we do. So you're going to meet him maybe after the contract is signed. And yeah, Vecellio describes in the 1590s these well-chaperoned visits that you might go on. During these excursions, you're still going to wear a black veil, but it's attached more loosely. And again, it's going to cover your face, but not your bodice. And your bodice, or the sotana that you're wearing out, is usually going to be white. The outer garments that you're going to wear, though, are going to be of a dark color, sometimes black, with a short train, because you do not want your costly white silk garments dragging across the walkways of Venice and getting into the floodwaters and just what other filth ends up in the streets. You get to finally wear jewelry. Gold and pearl jewelry are going to enter your life. Before this, you are not really going to be wearing much jewelry. As well as perfumed gloves. Gloves are often a symbol of marriage. So if you look at a portrait, you will see sometimes gentlemen like peeling a glove down a woman's hand. That is an indication that they are married, and he is the one who has the rights to do that. Nobody else. You can look at her in this beautiful portrait, but I'm the one who gets to take her clothes off later. All right. That is the gloves, and they're perfumed, which is a really cool thing. Perfumed clothing is big throughout period. It's not something we do all that often in the SCA, but it's a really cool idea. And a long jeweled gold belt. The gold belt, that girdle, is going to be a big symbol of your marriage. So once the contract has been signed, the groom is going to present a ring along with a few courtship gifts or contratos in a small box, itty bitty box, silver casket, with ribbons, pearls, jewelry. Sometimes he's going to bring you fabric for new dresses, belts, gloves. Vienna Gritti received a silver casket with a zibellino, or one of those jeweled animal pelts. If you've ever seen these, they're adorable. They have like basically the body of a mink, but the face has been replaced by like this jeweled head and sometimes little paws and a little collar. Super cute. Dead animal things, but super cute. On the morning of her wedding is when she received those. You accepting that casket of gifts is what seals that contract. If you do not accept those gifts, great shame upon your family, but that contract's not going to go through. If you refuse, one bride from Bologna refused these from her groom-to-be. She also then ran off to what is called a converiti, which is sort of these quasi religious houses of cloister. And she stayed holed up in there for something like 11 months until he lost interest and went and found another bride. But that's basically the length you had to get out of one of these contracts once it's made. The belt, and you will see the gold belt on a bunch of portraits, is that symbolically him clasping that belt together represents your union, and you're only ever going to unclasp it again when you're on your wedding night. Hey, baby. There's so many weird little like, well, this means that we get to do this later. All right. Again, we talked about the gloves. You're going to wear gloves out in public. That's also just a thing we don't do anymore. Up until like the 60s, people wear gloves out in public all the time. I suspect that fashion is going to come back in. I don't know. I'm no expert, but I think that and matching adorable face masks are going to be the new rage when we're allowed out again, even a little. But gloves were considered a very intimate gift. If there's gloves in a portrait, you will often see she has one glove, or she has two, or he's holding them. That is showing their marriage and their very intimate relationship. You also get super cool wedding hair for brides in Venice. Remember we talked about you want blonde, long hair? Welcome to super cool wedding hair. They're going to put threads of gold through it, and they're going to parade you through the streets. And by streets, I mean canals. Brides wear a very distinctive dress. It's the biggest indicator is the hair. It's going to be worn loose. Much like this. There are woodcuts of brides throughout the ages in gondolas, and they start out inside the gondola and they just sort of migrate further and further out so people can see your outfit. Till the one that I have in the handout here is from 1565, where she looks like she's just holding on to the back of the little covering in the gondola, running around town. So you get gold filaments, so gold threads that are put through your hair. You get a circlet of gold or a diadem. I've seen only a few portraits with the diadem, and the one I can think of off the top of my head is Aphrodite, and she has the diadem, but that indicates marriage. And you might wear white. You might wear a simple white satin with the baragoni, those upper sleeves. The upper sleeves in Venice in Italian Renaissance clothing get very complicated. Simpler ones. Lacy ruffled camicia, gold embroidered white gowns with elaborate necks and shoulder ruffs. I don't know if you've ever seen the shoulder ruffs that come in like the 1580s, 1590s. They're real dumb. They are just ruffs that you attach to your shoulders, and they're just like little fins. I don't get it. The color of choice, though, is red. So a lot of brides are wearing white, but if you were real wealthy, you're wearing red. Bright red wedding gowns. Michelio describes plush crimson velvet bridal gowns. And Vienna, who we talked about before, Vienna Greedy, she was the granddaughter of the Doge. She wore a rose-colored gown meant to match his robes. So she got dispensation to match the Doge. Her little sister, who gets married a couple years later, 2 years later, also wears... Oh, that's actually a different family. There we go. But the dress is probably going to get passed down. You don't get to wear these very long. It's probably going to a family member. But red velvet, that's the color. You want to be a styling bride in the late 1500s. You want red. You wear the expensive gold and pearl jewelry, and that is mostly, just like on the runways today, rented or borrowed. That is borrowed from other family members. It might be part of your trousseau, but you are expected to give that away later. This wealth migrates. There just wasn't enough money for each of you to be given all your own jewelry and to get to keep it. You're going to have to parcel that out to the rest of the members of your family throughout your life. There is the marriage chain, the vinculum amoris, chain of love. And I don't have my... Ooh, I might have mine right here. As I might have been going through my jewelry the other day. I do have mine. This is a reproduction from a woman who is on Etsy as the Mad Jeweler. And it has little letters, and it says love without end. And it's actually in French, but it is an Italian accessory. So you'll see these, especially the Lotto portrait we talked about before. You will see this gold chain, and it is meant to sort of sit on your shoulders like this. But this is your marriage chain. This indicates you were either a bride, and this is your bridal portrait, or you've been recently married. Because again, I'm not going to get to hold on to this. This is going out to a sibling or a cousin or someone else in the family in the near future. One particular item. So during the Ascension, so 15 days of celebrating the Feast of the Ascension, is Venice's big tourist time. And they like to have the weddings during then because they are displaying the wealth of the city. That is why you were paraded out in these gondolas. That is why you're out in all your finery. It is showing off how much more money than we have than the rest of Italy and the rest of Europe. So Vecellio describes the brides marrying during the Ascension as shining like so many suns, having the most lavish jewelry, silver-handled fans, long trains, long transparent veils, and they're heavily perfumed. Again, many foreign visitors are in Venice at this time to watch this. This is basically a big show to show them how much money Venice has. This is also when the Doge celebrates his symbolic marriage to the sea. So every year the Doge goes, drops a wedding ring into the sea in Venice. There's a whole big ceremony. It's totally not pagan at all, except it definitely is. Where they celebrate the Venice's relationship with the sea. We did a portion of that when Ozra and I stepped up. There was a ceremony with rings and water. Worked out. You get a party called a oh gosh. Just not going to pronounce things correctly. Parentado. You get basically a coming out party. So once the contract is signed, you get to go on the Display of the Bride tour. On alternating days, the groom's male and female relatives are going to visit. You are going to give them the same show. The 10 o'clock is the same as the 11 o'clock show. So the 8 o'clock is the same as the 11 o'clock show. You are going to have them seated in your home or out in the portico. The bride comes out of her room. You're dressed up. You are escorted by your elderly dance master, known as a ballerino. And you get to dance for their amusement. Quite literally. It is to show how graceful you are. You perform a few dances to musical accompaniment, and you bow to the assembled relatives. Now, for his relatives that are in religious orders, who are still probably giving money for somebody to get married, you get to go to those religious establishments and do the same show. You're going to travel in that gondola, again, with your hair on display, with those gold filaments in the sun. Originally, you were inside. It then became the tradition that you sat on the roof of the gondola. Because, again, how are people going to know how much money we have if we don't make you sit on the roof? We don't put you out as on display as much as humanly possible. So other family members are going to form a procession with their gondolas. They're going to be onlookers. This is a big parade. Enjoy your day. You get the one day. On the mainland, this would be done with processions with carriages with white horses, but we're in Venice, so we're doing this with gondolas. Remember, the gondolas don't all become black until very late in period, when the Doge is finally like, we have to stop spending this much money on these. They're going to be gilded. They're going to be brightly painted. They're going to be carved. They are going to be like the Rolls Royces of the day. These are going to be as flashy as possible. We are Italy. We are going to dress to impress. All right. So after the last display, after the last time that you do your little dance, you then are going to be part of a grand procession. The bridal party is going to take you to the church, and you're going to celebrate the wedding mass. Usually with musicians, servants carrying torches are going to be lit, and they're going to accompany you. And then these grand processions happen all over Italy as well. There's an entire book about the Medici wedding customs, which I have been looking for an affordable copy of, yet to find it. But it talks about the 40 young men, the 40 young pages in completely white silk suits. And I don't know who put little pre-teenage boys in white suits and thought those were going to stay clean, but that was a thing. They also talk about there are commedia performances that are part of these grand elaborate processions and wedding celebrations. So the entire book is dedicated to the 1589 Grand Duke Ferdinando de Medici marries a French princess, Christine of Lorraine. It took a month to execute the wedding and a year of planning. So there's usually a huge feast afterwards. It's at the home of the groom. These are going to be the most lavish meals. Veronese's, marriage at Cana, aside from the small fact that Jesus is in it, is really a pretty good indication of what a wedding feast is going to look like. You look in the background, so you look beyond that first level, you look at the second level, and there's just giant serving boards full of roasts, full of food. There's servants everywhere in livery, and they are carrying jugs of wine. It is a huge deal. You better come hungry. Specialty foods, courses. When Eleanor of Aragon arrived in Ferrara in 1473, she had a multi-day wedding. She got greeted by a parade of allegorical floats. On subsequent days, there was a 56-course feast. I'm like, that is way too much food. Dances, jousts, sugar sculptures were displayed. Filippo Beraldo reported that the 1487 wedding of the d'Estes, Lucrezia d'Este, in Bologna, giant sugar sculptures of castles, ships, people, animals, and a flaming wheel of fireworks that accidentally ignited some of the wedding guests. I don't know about you, but I've heard of the tales of, I believe it was Penzic 30, where there was a flaming wheel of fireworks that accidentally ignited some of the tents. So, flaming wheel of fireworks, never a good idea, then or now. Don't do it. All right. And then once you are a wife, during your first year of marriage, you still get to dress as a bride. After that, you're expected to be pregnant and dressed like a matron and give away all your pretty clothes and jewelry. Your wedding finery is going to get farmed out to other siblings, to other family members. Your jewelry is going to get farmed out. And your goal in life now becomes to have little boy babies. That's your goal. The methods of achieving this are ridiculous. The pamphlets that how to do it goes over involve some ridiculous advice. Suffice it to say that it has what position and exactly how long it should take and what you should look at afterwards, which is masculine portraits. Only masculine portraits. All right. So, rules for a wife. Oh, there are also like some weird fumigation things that happen here for fertility. There's some like Gwyneth Paltrow level nonsense that comes in. That there are cultures to this day that are fumigating their lady parts and thinking that's a good idea. Generally, it's not. It doesn't need a facial. All right. So, rules for the wife. Again, 1589, they are not going to differ that much from 1300. They are not going to differ that much from the early 19th century. Guard over the family and the possessions inside your home. Don't let anybody in the house without talking to your husband. Do not dress or adorn yourself beyond your means or the customs of your locale. Do not stick your nose in your husband's affairs, especially political doings. You do not understand what's going on. He probably has a courtesan who can explain to him what politically is going on. That's not for you to know. You're to know how to have babies, and only babies, and boy babies. Imitate. I love this one. Imitate the honest ways of your husband. He knows how to do all things. Why can't you be more like him? Revere your husband, not with servile fear, but with filial respect. So look on him like a father. He's probably old enough to be yours. Be happy and even-handed with your husband in good times and in bad. That's some bullshit advice right there. But yeah, imitate the honest ways of your husband is just something I would like to embroider on a cushion and then light on fire. All right. What happens if you don't have a family? What is going to happen to you? You don't have a family who's going to provide that service of getting a dowry together for you. There actually is a charity called Casa della Zitelle, the House of the Young Maidens, that the Venetian noblewomen put together in 1568. It existed until the 20s when it merged with another charity. And this is a charity not set up for partially set up out of the goodness of their hearts, but also partially to stop pretty girls going into the prostitution. Why don't we just give them a dowry so they can get married and start having sex with our husbands? It took in girls who were between 9 and 13 who were at risk of becoming prostitutes. They went into the casa. They were educated to make them marketable as wives or nuns as an adult. Typically, women stayed until their early 20s. A few stayed on in the house until their 40s. Some of them had the option of staying on and then teaching the next generations. The founders of the house were noblewomen. I'm sorry, did I move things onto your spot? Come on. There's a cat here. The founders were noblewomen. Your entire board are noblewomen. So this is a charity for women by women in the late 1500s. The founders of the house were both single and widowed. They consider prostitution as a problem not from women's sinful natures, but because of poverty and a lack of options in Venetian society. Because again, you can't get married. Your option is going into the church, and the convents are going to want a dowry because it's going to cost money to feed and clothe you. Or you're going to need a skill. Competition for admission was stiff. Girls were interviewed by members of the governing board. They had home visits. The goal was to ensure that you actually were poor. And if you were pretty and likely to prostitute, they were going to take you in. The exact quote is, poor or those without beauty can find shelter elsewhere. Bologna also had a similar requirement for their charity programs. It was almost entirely staffed by women as well. So there was a house matron. She was usually a widow. She was usually a noble widow who had sort of fallen on hard times. She is going to run the house. She is going to make sure that you all stay pure and you keep to your lessons. There is a doctor who will come in and sometimes examine the young women. He is always supervised. The only person who comes in unsupervised is going to be the confessor. Confessors. There's the weak link. The founders put clauses in to govern their behaviors. If two charges show a marked partiality for each other, they must be separated and supervised by others. Now, what possibly could they be referring to? Two charges showing a marked partiality for each other. What could that be? Could it be young lesbians? Probably could be young lesbians. Yes. So they have it in their rules how to deal with that. You know that has somebody's name on it. Two somebody's. Once the bride married, because a husband is going to know that a bride from this house is going to have no family, and that the charity is providing her dowry to make her a candidate for a wife. They actually then will also continue to go and visit her to make sure that the husband is not taking advantage of her later in life. So they're going to continue and do home visits to make sure she is being taken care of and basically protecting the investment of her dowry in her. So they are still under the protection of those very, very powerful noble women. And it is to show them that they are, they're not forgotten. Basically, you can't just marry a girl out of this house, take her money, and forget about her. They're going to follow up. All right, so those are our noble women. Lower class girls are going to end up as working girls who sometimes practice magic for a little supplemental income. The title I've put on this is Prepare to be a Working Girl, a Magic Working Girl, but likely everybody's going to be a maid. So there are three main ways to support yourself, and the biggest of that is domestic servitude. Female servants are going to be single. You're likely poor. You're also likely to be an immigrant, or you have left rural life behind and headed to the big city to make your way as a maid. The big time. All right. Employers were required by law to review their servants' contracts every 10 years to make sure they weren't taking advantage of them and were paying them the right amount. So there was some protection for servants, not much though. Right? Many servants also had their employers act as executor of their will or in other legal matters. So again, that advice where we're telling you not to be too familiar with the servants, you're real familiar with the servants. If they're asking you to execute their will or act for you in other legal matters, there's a strong relationship there. However, towards the end of the 1600s, male servants are more fashionable. They're considered more honest. They have more honor. And so female servants are out of fashion. So you are likely, you may end up as a prostitute. So Venice is a prime example of cultures where men marry comparatively late. Extramarital sex is taboo. And there's a lot of wealth involved. There's no real affection in that very expensive marriage. So prostitution is going to thrive. Venice is known for its prostitution in period. It is known there are sort of three classes. Veronica Franco herself wrote about these three classes of whores. The meretrici, also known as the courtesan puttana, are the street prostitutes. 10% of the population is estimated to have been street prostitutes in Venice. That's a hell of a lot of prostitutes. Venice is basically the Vegas of period. 2/3 of these meretrici are listed as the heads of their household. So every church is going to take surveys of the occupations and the households that are in their area. They're going to list who is the head of the household. 2/3 of the households where the occupation is meretrici, she is the head of household. She is the one who is in charge. In 1539 and 1572, they try to expel immigrant prostitutes. These are times when disease is coming to Venice. If there is a plague, again, they're going to blame the foreigners and they are going to blame the courtesans, the sinful ways of the city. 1576 through 77 had food shortages. Again, they blamed those on these sinful ways of Venice. So reformed or retired prostitutes who either medically could not continue on with their profession were housed in their own converiti, which are those semi-religious houses. One in Venice grew out of a hospital that was for syphilitics called the Incurabili, late 1520s. So we have a converiti that basically springs up from a hospital that was set up to treat syphilis. And that is going to have a lot of reformed prostitutes. And also magic. Despite us being in a Catholic society, a very Christian society, although there were other religions in Venice, they get in trouble for practicing witchcraft an awful lot. Remember that Veronica Franco was brought up on trial not for being a courtesan, but for practicing magic. She was brought up on charges that she had practiced a spell to find out who was stealing from her. She was turned in by a male servant who was probably the one stealing from her. She got off on those charges, but this was a common thing. There were little charms that are being done, little different, who am I going to marry? What's going to happen with my life? We have so much uncertainty. You're going to turn to some fortune telling and some magic. As long as you don't get caught, this is a great way to make money. So working women often supplemented their income by selling charms and incantations. Working as a wise woman was done by both single, married, and widows. And when the Inquisition came to Venice in 1547, They specifically started to focus on practitioners of magic and demonology, because God knows they were fun people. They targeted these lower class single women who offered charms to help heal the sick and show a glimpse of the future. So we don't have a written record of these things until they come up into court, or there is a church doctrine against them. This is the same as we look at sexual practices. We know what sexual practices had happened or were popular because there were little books that priests could have that said, here are the punishments, or here are the penance for doing these certain things. So we've been reading a book called The Curious History of Sex by Kate Lister, and they went over, you're going to do, for 7 years, you will do penance on the feast days if you have engaged in oral sex. Or 5 years if you've done this other thing. This is one of the ways we can get this record, because it's not going to come up otherwise in the popular record. People aren't going to write this down, but we know it's happening. All right. So, 32% of women were listed as the head of their household, and 30% of those appear to have been single women in around the late 1500s. So, single women are twice as likely to be listed as their head of household than single men. And they are making that money either as a servant or as a prostitute or as a widow. So we talked about before, your other option, noble woman. You'd love for you to get married. The other 2/3 of you are usually going to end up, though, as nuns. The 100 years between 1550 and 1650, about 50% of Venetian noblewomen took the veil. Between 50 and 60%, it's hard to get actual numbers. Many of these were not of really their own volition. Families, psychologically and other ways, coerced daughters to join convents. Yeah. So there were 51 convents that were founded in Venice and the surrounding areas between 640 and 1600. It's a lot of convents in a small area. Most women lived separately from lay society, were prohibited by law from interacting with people outside of the cloister. And while they may have been forbidden, it seems like they keep having to repeat this rule over and over again. So that tells us it's not being followed. It's like the one where they keep trying to lower the dowry, raise the dowry price. Like, okay, guys, I guess it can only be 1,600 ducats. So we're going to see in 1514 and 1563, they're both going to come out with rules that say, no, you actually do have to stay in the cloister. You have to stay in the convent if you're a nun. They still get out. But becoming a nun, there is a way to get power as a single woman. Abbesses have a ton of power. That is probably the most power you could have outside of being a noble wife, is becoming an abbess. You are going to control the assets that the convent possesses. You're going to control probably the farms and different properties that your abbey is going to own. And abbesses in Venice are all spiritually married to the Doge as well. So you're bigamists. You're married to Jesus and the Doge. They received indulgences on the 1st of May, and they basically had to bless the government every year. Convents also fought state control. The state tried to put in a rule that they could only have dowries for their nuns of 1,000 ducats. They successfully fought that off in 1602. They said, no, you can give us more money than that. It costs a lot of money to keep that many women all cloistered. And again, we talked about converites a couple times. They're sort of quasi-monastic institutions for problem cases. All sorts of people are going to end up in a converiti. Orphans, widows, naughty widows, runaways, women secretly married to clerics, adulterous wives, battered women, victims of rape and incest, women who rejected grooms. We talked about that before. She ran away. She did not accept a little cask of gifts. They're routinely sent to the converiti. Problem with being cloistered and in a convent. You are still not really all that safe. You're safer, not all that safe. So Venice had one converiti that was dedicated to Mary Magdalene, tended to have a lot of former prostitutes. About 400 nuns were in this location. And there was a priest called Giovanni Pietro Leone. Leone was a confessor to that convent for nearly 20 years. He refused anyone else from being a confessor to this converiti. And he was known publicly for his scholarship and his piety. Privately, he treated that converiti as his own personal harem and would do purity tests on the nuns. He would molest them during confession. There actually are different accounts throughout late period of various confessing, I don't even know what you call it, confession booths that had things like weird little doors and little flip-up sections so you could hold your hand and totally not touch people. Yeah. This guy eventually gets caught. He gets convicted of kidnapping young initiates and basically ferrying them off to his friends and other associates who were paying him for sort of virgin entertainment for the evening. He also had a spy hole for where they bathed. He was all around really awful dude. And if they did get pregnant from his attentions, he would force them to have abortions, which is, of course, also against what the church teaches. So he finally gets found out in 1561, and it's thought that the executioner might have been related to somebody who was within the convent, because it took them 8 different tries to try to get his head off. They still couldn't do it. Someone in the crowd then came up. They tried another 4 or 5 blows. Still, the head did not separate. So a guard came up with a knife and finished the job. And one onlooker stated it was too light a sentence for the most wicked man in the world. Because we have court records, we know what happened. So yeah, Arcangelo Turbody was our rebel nun. So at age of 11, so she's slightly out of period. She's 16, 17. So 16, age of 11, she entered the convent. She becomes a boarder at the Benedictine convent of St. Anna. She took vows in 1620. So she is 14 when she takes her vows. She did not wear a habit until she was forced to. She did not cut her hair until the cardinal forced her to, and the Patriarch of Venice both ganged up on her and were like, you really need to dress and act like a nun. She wrote of Cardinal Cornaro. Told you I can't pronounce things tonight. I'm so glad this is going to live forever on the internet. Explaining, he made me amend my vanities. I cut off my hair, but did not uproot my emotions. I reformed my life, but my thoughts flourished rampantly, and just like my shorn hair, grew all the more. So basically she's saying, you can force me to cut off my hair, you can force me to wear whatever you want. My thoughts are still going to grow and still going to be mine. Very sort of modern way of thinking. She wrote of this in The Monastic Paradise, published in 1643. She wrote a couple different books that are all published after she passes away. She wrote in some of her correspondence that living as a nun, she was living a lie. She had visitors quite often to her convent, which basically had the local establishment and the Catholic establishment in just threw up their hands at her. But I wish we had someone named Arcangelo, because I think it's a real cool name, and she was a real cool lady. So if you want a rebellious persona name, Arcangelo Turbody, look to her. She basically lived her best life as she could in that convent, forced to be there. And then, of course, we have the ultimate rebel, the courtesans. This is not an easy life. Veronica Franco actually writes, someone wrote her, the correspondence survives. It says, hey, I want you to teach my daughter to be a courtesan. She's like, no, you don't want to do this to her. You don't want to. So the cortigiana, or the courtier, it really means someone who attends at court, but at the time it's a well-educated, independent woman trained as an artist or artisan. So these are dancers, these are musicians. The most famous ones we know about are poets. So if we're talking about Veronica Franco, we're talking about Tulia Argona. Who's the other one? Gaspara Stampa, thought to be the greatest woman poet in Italy. These are our courtesans. So they're associated with the wealthy and powerful. These are smart women that noble men get to talk to and actually have a conversation and then maybe sleep with. But this is a woman who is going to know about the politics of the day. She's going to understand science. She's going to understand art. She's someone you can really have a conversation with, which you can't with your wife, because if your wife, again, is properly educated, she has really only the purview of the home within her mind. She's not going to know all these worldly things. So you want a courtesan to hang out with. They're also going to throw salons. They're going to patronize artists. They're going to have, really flourishing places where thought and philosophy can expand. In Rome, especially, Rome is a town of supposedly celibate men, celibate pious men who need to be in a very political structure. They need to have times where they can get face time with cardinals and bishops and other things to rise through the ranks in Rome. And the only way to do this is through the courtesans. So the courtesans throwing parties, that the churchmen would attend, or allow you to get face time and curry favor with various people. Rome ran on the society of the courtesans until they threw them all out and got them all murdered at one point, which is a fun thing you should look up. By fun, I mean not fun. All right. So in Renaissance Venetian society, again, there are different classes of courtesan. They are listed in the 1518 census. So we have the honest courtesan, the cortigiana onesta. She's the intellectual courtesan. She is the one who is on the Veronica Franco level. She's the superstar. She's the superstar level courtesan. Then we have the cortigiana de lume, or de candela, the lower class, who tend to practice along the Rialto. They mean the lantern courtesan, the lamplight courtesan. And then there is the cortesana putana, or whore. These are your real lower street level. All right. So we have those three striations. Majority of folks you see in the SCA doing a courtesan persona are going to be the cortigiana onesta level. That's what I do. A lot of people do. There are some interesting illuminations of the lantern courtesans, because it's sort of a very, you can see their clothing is imitating the upper classes, but is just off enough. Like they don't have enough petticoats on. You can sort of see their legs through the skirts. That's very interesting. I find it interesting. Veronica Franco, 1546 to 1591, the most celebrated. She's the one Dangerous Beauty's about. She's the one who has the Honest Courtesan book. Everybody knows about Veronica Franco. She also sort of did not want to go into this life. She wanted something else for herself. Her mother, Paola, was also a courtesan. There is also a courtesan catalog of Venice that was published. It lists all their prices. We don't know if it was an actual price listing because the prices seem to be off from what it should have been. But you're going to have a fine education, considerable literary and artistic accomplishments. They're going to be very well educated, very smart, and they're able to command very high prices. Very high prices. And it's not guaranteed you're going to sleep with them. You might just have them as a companion for the evening. I included in here Tintoretto, which is my favorite. Supposedly it's a portrait of Veronica. It lives at the Worcester Art Museum down the street, which I pass on my commute when I'm allowed to go to work again someday. I like going and seeing it. There are other infamous ones. They have some rock star names. So we have Imperia la Divina, Imperia the Divine, who operates out of Rome. She is in the early 1500s. She is considered the first famous courtesan in Europe. And her sort of main patron is a banker. Tullia de Aragona lived in Rome, then Venice, then Ferrara, then Siena, then Florence, then Rome. Tullia has a square named after her in Florence, also a very famous poet. There were a group of men who were her patrons who called themselves the Tullians. So the group of patrons that the known world courtesans have, if you have sort of a protector in there, are known as the Tullians as well. She was also the daughter of a courtesan. Sex work in period is not considered a lifelong blemish on your reputation. Sex work in period is a thing you did at one point, and if you go on to marry, then you go on and marry. In various places, not just in Italy, and there's the cat again. In Italy, in Germany, in France, these are places, you may have been a prostitute in the past, but if you get married and live a life, you will get married and live a life. It's a very different mindset than sort of what we have here. Because remember, a lot of this time, we're looking at history through the lens of the Victorians, which distorts quite a bit with their morality. Then we also have Isabella De Luna. She was from Granada. She also ended up in Rome. She was a former camp follower. She was there at the attack at Tunis in 1535, and she got sent home. She got taken home to Rome in 1544, and her main client was Roberto Strozzi. So, again, nice work if you can get it. You're very likely not to get it. It takes a lot of education, but it is, if you're willing to take that leap, another option for the noble women. You're not going to be able to see your family ever again. They're not going to talk to you in the streets until you stop. But it is an option to live your own life and have your own place. You would have sort of a mother who would arrange your contracts for you. And, often these courtesans had significantly younger siblings that also lived with them. Siblings. Oh no, it's my little brother. Well, actually, it's somebody's kid. But this was something that happened in families. The children of courtesans were known throughout the courts. If we look at Pietro Arantini, who was a famous playwright and poet, his mother was famously a courtesan. He wrote an entire play called The Whore, which is a dialogue about sort of instructing someone into their life of prostitution, which you can get copies of still. All right. Well, that has been me talking for a very long time, and I'm willing to take questions, as I haven't seen any in a while. Or we can chat. Or I can just look at myself and try not to get the flames to show in my eyes. You can unmute yourselves. Or not. Elena, you're so pretty.
I was trying to think of a question, but I'm like, you explained everything really well, and I had a couple of prep that I was going to ask, and then you ended up answering them as we went on. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have any other ones.
Sorry. So what I do in my mundane life is I'm a corporate trainer. So this is very much in my wheelhouse of what I do every day. And where I've been working from home is sort of, I'm now working, instead of looking at people, I'm sort of getting used to this radio silence of just sort of like, I can see you, I can see you're paying attention. You can tell from your face, maybe you don't understand what's going on. Let's try to keep it fun. All right. But yes, like I said, I have a link to my handout there. We've gone through most of it. Go through the bibliography. I really enjoy the How to Do It book because what I touched on is a chapter of that entire book. Single women in Europe, in the European past, 1250 to 1800 is the one that is very much like women should be spelled with a Y, and femininity forever, women's rights. Art and Love in Renaissance Italy is based off of an exhibit that was at the Met, if you can find it. During that exhibit, the Met also had a variety of lectures that were done that they published at the time on iTunes University. So I highly recommend going and finding those. They also have some of the dowry goods and some other illustrations. They would get fabrics woven for these weddings that had your family crest in them, and some of them still survive. I know the Met has some that has the Medici crest, portions of Medici crest woven into them. But yeah, find the How to Do It guide to the good living for Renaissance Italians. Virgins of Venice is a good one. Private Lives of Renaissance Venice also will show you the layout of most palazzos. It'll show you where they sort of women were supposed to go and then where they actually went. I also found it really interesting talking about the decor of the house. So they talk about the spalieri. So they talk about one of your marriage goods is going to be the portraits that go along the very top above the paneling in the bedrooms. And some of those still survive. And you also had these massive clothing chests that you can see in some portraits. So like, I think it's the Venus of Urbino, the maidservants in the back throwing dresses over her shoulder out of one of these massive wooden chests. In the 1800s, some very helpful Europeans found those, took them apart for the art, but you can still find a couple of them, the cassone, still intact. So those are really interesting. And seeing how the beds were even constructed is really cool. I want to say it's the Met. One of the big museums has a forgery they've just figured out, but it's a really good forgery, so they still have it out. They just tell you it's a forgery of just these massive furniture. That furniture is going to stay with the house. You're not going to take that on otherwhere. These massive chests are going in the house once, and that's it. But definitely those are things to check out. Let's see. But yeah, I would definitely, if you have not, the Art and Love in Renaissance Venice, in Renaissance Italy, find the lectures along with that. So courtesan culture. Courtesan culture happens in any community where there is that dichotomy. So like we have some courtesans from real far east in India. So India had an extremely striated courtesan culture. as far back as the 5th century, where you had to know a certain, I think it's like 28 different arts before they would let you sort of be in the courtesan culture. The Middle East, it depends on where you are. There are going to be more dancers. There are, they talk about the harems, but that's not really what was going on in harems, because those were all women for one person's consumption. So you want to go to India to find some more of the sort of sacred prostitutes or prostitution that was happening there. Has more of a courtesan culture. If you go way far east, you go to somewhere like Japan. So the geisha are out of period, but their predecessors, and now I just can't stop touching my face. Their predecessors, and I cannot remember the word for it, but there is a actor class of people. It starts with an M. That often, if a woman was an actress, she was also a prostitute. She would also available, and that's sort of the precursor of the geisha. You can also look in places like Germany had municipal brothels. So they would actually have, the city or town would set up as an income stream, a brothel on the outskirts of town. And we know that from the history rolls of the town of sort of how they've governed their brothel and what income they got from it. But then the Spanish had courtesans, but Spanish. It was a lot riskier when you're in the hotbed of the Inquisition to be doing this. There's not much known about the French. The French actually go into the official royal mistress line very quickly. So you get people like Diane de Poitiers, who are the official mistress and known as that in the court. That is their position. That is what they are getting that for. They tend to go for more mistresses. Same with the English. The English tend to go with more mistresses than an actual, like, a courtesan culture. And then if you go way far back, like I have friends who, well, I want to be a Viking courtesan. It's like they didn't really have that because relationships were structured differently and women had a lot more power in that culture. So you're always going to find someone, you're always going to find sex. It's just what's going to happen. Whether or not you're finding those real high end, those real high prices of sex for money is different. But there's usually someone who is selling sex. Just depends on sort of what level of society they're in and what permissions they have. Where we're talking about the SCA and the known world courtesans, we're going to talk about all classes. We use courtesan as a blanket term, but the actual role of courtesan is that real high-end courtesan. Hopefully that answered your question, Jennifer. I don't know enough about Middle Eastern courtesans, I gotta say that. Anybody else?
Can you talk more about women who got married as an arrangement?
So what would you like to know about women who got married as an arrangement?
It just sounds like interesting because it's like if you needed like the permission of your family and then you're going, it sounds like you'd be going kind of like behind their backs maybe to like set these things up, or you'd be like it seems like it would be some kind of like scam, not scam, but like a front.
So your family is going to tell you when you get married. They're going to go and they're going to create, your father is going to go and create this contract to have you married off. And then they're going to tell you, hey, next Thursday, you're marrying Giuseppe. He's coming over to the house tomorrow to give you a cask of jewels. This is what you're doing. So Dorothea is the one who hid out in the Converiti. She had a fiance named Vespa, who led a man to snatch her back. So she is one of the very few ones we know who escaped this arranged marriage. She didn't want to marry this guy. But generally, your family told you, you were marrying and you said, all right, let's go do it. So if you were doing any of these other things, you were basically leaving the fold of the family. You were saying, hey, adios, muchachos. And there isn't very much documented on how sort of you got into these other, there was no like how to become a courtesan. A, go to the marketplace. Find a lady in a nice dress. She's probably a whore. Talk to her about it.
I just fucking love you so much.
So there was a huge problem. So Venice talks about this, that they had such a tourist industry. They were writing they were writing basically propaganda to get tourists into the city. That when men showed up, they had this expectation that there were prostitutes everywhere. And occasionally they would accost actual noble women and be like, come back to my place, or let me go to your palazzo. And then she's like, how dare you think I'm a courtesan? Well, it actually was really hard to tell the difference because they put rules, they put sumptuary laws in place, but the courtesans usually just paid the fine. So you weren't supposed to have white pearls around your neck. Again, as a visitor to the city, you're not going to know the difference between blush-colored pearls and white pearls. Means the white pearl lady you don't talk to, and the blush pearl lady you can really talk to. Like, you'll notice throughout my reign, I never wore really white pearls. I always had a color. Also, you were supposed to have a gold veil. And yellow is often a color that's associated with prostitution. But the more you read Vecellio's description, it's really a black veil with a gold band. And sometimes that gold band was as much as just a single gold thread that was going around it. I mean, technically, it's gold. It's banded around there, but you're not going to be able to tell the difference. So there's not much that tells us. We get a couple things here about, we get a couple court cases. There's one woman who was married to a guy who had been a merchant. She got married to him. He converted to Christianity to marry her. Turns out he wasn't that sincere, and he started spending her dowry all over the place and gambling it away. And so there's a court record of her suing him. There's a record of her suing him basically to get her dowry back, and she does get it back. So it's not sure, we don't know exactly how you got into that life, but I'm pretty sure you could figure it out how to get into that life. And it was real bold choice. She took her dowry back and she went back on the marriage market. There aren't records if she married again, or if she just controlled that money. She probably married again. I personally would have been pretty gun shy about that. But she did get her dowry, as much of her dowry as they could get back, that he had not spent. Because the husband is supposed to keep that dowry in trust for your children. And if he's not doing that job, the courts in Venice want to know. It's a very serious thing. Because that's your job. That's your job as the man in the relationship, is to keep that dowry in place for your children and to keep that wealth. And if you are gambling that away, if you're putting your wife and children in danger, they're going to take action. But it was not an uncommon thing for you to have sued for separation and get it. It just takes a lot of people knowing all about your business for you to sue. You had to sort of take that chance of everyone's going to know what's going on now. But yeah, especially like even the girl who stayed in the Converiti and avoided the fiance. There's no record of what happened to her after that. There's no record of what happened to Dorothea. So who knows? That's one of those things that's unfortunate where we're dealing with a portion of the written record that survived, and that portion that did survive is not telling us certain things. It's like when you're trying to redact a period recipe where they're like, oh, just do it like you always do. You know, use the right amount of flour. What's the right amount of flour? I need you to tell me. Like, oh, everybody knows. And they're just not, they're not as concerned in finishing the story as just what happened in the courts right then. Of course, the second I move away. Right. Thank you, Arliana. I'm glad I answered your questions. I don't understand your Jennifer's question. Comment. All right. So, Elena, what time are we at, my friend? Oh, 8:55. So I'm nearly 2 hours.
Which is perfect.
Yay! I always have trouble when I'm at Pennsic. I always have somebody who has to sit there with the timer and be like, tickety-tock, tickety-tock.
I mean, you know, we all have so many other things to get to right now.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, I will stop recording so we can switch more to a chatting thing. Thank you again. This was wonderful.
You're welcome. Always happy to.